Somebody's talking, we can't hear her.
Good afternoon. The Credit Institute at Community Resources for Justice is pleased to welcome you to the Systemic Intervention webinar series. Today's webinar is conducting a data analysis of criminal justice system practices. Hello, everyone. My name is Christy Pierce Stanford, and I'm associate at the Crime and Justice Institute. In CJ's mission, CI provides nonpartisan consulting, policy analysis, and research services to improve public safety in communities throughout the country. We work with this group of practitioners and policymakers, including corrections officials, courts, law enforcement, political and community leaders in local and state jurisdictions across the country. Our primary goal is to make criminal and juvenile justice systems more efficient and cost-effective in order to promote accountability for achieving better outcomes. These webinars were developed as part of the technical assistance CJI is providing throughout the state of California in conjunction with the Chief Officers of California, Fair Foundation, and the National Institute of Corrections. Our websites have been thoughtfully designed to reach diverse audiences and stakeholder groups by incorporating their various perspectives, all aligned by the principles of systemic interventions for improving local criminal justice systems. The vision for these webinars was created by the Systemic Interventions Work Group of CPOC to build a community learning and network of practice among various criminal justice system stakeholders as we work together to improve local communities. This webinar is the first of a three-part series that will take place the third Friday of every month through January of 2012. Agenda will cover the following areas. First, brief overview, followed by a feature presentation and active questions and answers where the panelists will respond to audience questions. Please note on the right side of your screen you have the ability to chat with us, answer polls, and submit questions to the panelists at any time. In this webinar, we have a quick poll for you, our audience. Let's take a moment to ask what stakeholder group you represent. Refer to the poll on the right side of your screen to respond. We'll let that run for a little bit so everybody gets a chance to respond. And while you're making your responses, I again just want to remind you that you can ask questions or chat at any time using those functions on the side panel of your screen. Okay, let's see those poll results. It looks like about half the folks that responded are with community corrections, and then a smorgasbord across the way other folks. So it's a pretty decent mix of people here. It's good to know as we go through our discussions going forward. And again, I want to let you know that we are recording today's session, and after sometime either the next week or shortly following Thanksgiving, this recording as well as any resource materials will be posted on our website. So we encourage you to go there. Also, if there are questions that don't get answered today, we'll also do our best to try to answer them and post them as well afterwards, along with the panelist bios and other resources that will all be on the CJI website free of charge. We hope you enjoy this webinar and look forward to hearing your comments and feedback on the brief evaluation following the completion of the webinar. We use the feedback from all of our webinars to make modifications to these events and be more responsive to audience requests. So we encourage you to take a moment to offer your feedback. Before introduce the moderator and feature presenters, I would like to recognize and thank the members of our Systemic Interventions Work Group. For most of the last year, I have had the pleasure of getting to know these two gentlemen as we develop systemic intervention resources. Thank you very much, Chief Mac Jenkins from San Diego, who is also serving as our moderator today, and Chief Scott McDonald from Santa Cruz for your insight, expertise, leadership, and support. We'd also like to thank Kristen Nielsen and Gabriella Priest from CJI for making these webinars possible, and Stan Anderson and all of the chiefs in California for spreading the word about this series. Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce our moderator and overview presenter, Chief Jenkins from San Diego. Chief Jenkins has worked in the criminal justice field for more than 33 years and is currently the Chief Probation Officer for the San Diego Probation Department. He is responsible for overseeing a department of more than 1,200 employees and the supervision of approximately 15,000 adult and 5,000 juvenile offenders. During his career, Chief Jenkins has been responsible for the design and implementation of special supervision programs for sex and domestic violence and drug offenders. He's also worked as a criminal justice consultant and planning to evidence practices for community supervision and collaborative justice programs. Chief Jenkins holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from the University of California at Irvine and a master's in criminal justice from California State University at Long Beach. Welcome, Chief Jenkins.
Thanks, Steve. I'm really happy to be here and happy to have the opportunity to moderate what I'm sure will be an interesting discussion. I can say, in addition to being a moderator, I'll also be hopefully participating and looking forward to engaging in the discussion because of what is happening in California right now. I'm one of 58 chiefs that's right in the middle of seeing through the implementation of AB 109, criminal justice realignment, while at the same time managing another significant initiative here in our state, SB 678. So very happy to be here.
So much. We're thrilled to have you here. And next we have Dr. Geraldine Nagy. Dr. Nagy is the Director of Travis County Community Supervision and Corrections Department and Pretrial Services. Previously, Dr. Nagy held the position of Deputy Director for the Community Justice Assistance Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, which focused on bringing evidence-based practices to community corrections programs statewide. As Director, Dr. Nagy has worked with numerous agencies and local stakeholders to re-engineer department operations to support more effective supervision strategies and strengthen probation by using EBP. Her focus is to fine-tune the policies adopted and to promote fidelity in implementation. Dr. Nagy is a member of several national advisory boards and work groups regarding evidence-based sentencing and local decision-making and has worked with the National Center for State Courts to develop training for the judiciary on these topics. Most recently, she co-authored a 10-step guide for transforming probation departments to reduce recidivism based on her work in Travis County. And in August of 2010, APPA presented Dr. Nagy with the Walter Dunbar Memorial Award, recognizing her significant contributions in the field of probation, noting her national presence and influence on community corrections. Welcome, Dr. Nagy.
Well, thank you, Christy, and thank you, CJAI, and the folks there in California for inviting us. We're looking forward to this.
Thrilled to have you. And now I have Dr. Carson Andreessen. He is a research specialist senior at Travis County Adult Probation for the past 5.5 years. Carson has a doctorate in criminal justice from Rutgers University. Previously, he worked as a research associate at the Center for Criminal Justice Policy Research at Northeastern University and the Police Institute in Newark, New Jersey. Through work, Carson has collaborated with various justice agencies to help transform their existing agency records into accessible data that they can use for organizational evaluation and planning. Additionally, Carson has taught courses and worked as a mental health counselor. Welcome, Carson.
Hello. Thanks, Christy, and thanks, Criminal Justice Institute, for putting this on. This will be very valuable.
Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time with us. And at this time, I'd like to hand over the webinar to Chief Jenkins.
Thanks, Christy. In setting the context for today's discussion, we want to talk about approaching things from a systemic intervention perspective. And in terms of systemic interventions, we're talking about looking at creating opportunities for dialogue on system change strategies. And you heard me mention earlier about two very significant initiatives that are underway in California. And California has enacted two statewide initiatives that emphasize a realignment and a new investment of criminal justice dollars on the local level. SB 678 offers incentives to local probation departments that increase probation success by reducing prison commitment rates. And AB 109 realigns the monitoring of non-serious prisoners and parolees to local probation departments. Both of these bills call for an evidence-based approach to reducing recidivism. When we use evidence-based policies and practices to achieve desired outcomes, such as reducing recidivism and victimization in our community, EBP is informed by data and research. Examples of EBP have successfully employed to reduce offender risk and subsequent recidivism through the use of effective assessment, supervision, and treatment strategies designed to change offender behavior. The focus on changing offender behavior looks at recidivism primarily through an offender lens rather than a systemic lens. But the dramatic increase in incarceration rates over the last 30 years is only somewhat explained by crime and offender behavior. It's more so explained by systemic policies and practices that have become increasingly reliant on incarceration as the primary response to violations of law and community supervision. So unraveling this reliance will require a combination of interventions at the offender and systems levels that rely on the bullets that you see in front of you. Data-driven, systemic interventions plans create a data-driven framework and methodology for our systems-level interventions to reduce reliance on incarceration. I'd next like to walk through some of the guiding principles and strategies for this work. The principles in front of you. Reliance on prison requires committed and strong leadership and a capacity for critique of system inefficiencies and ineffective practices. Key justice stakeholders must be willing to methodically examine system outcomes, identify areas for improvement, and implement necessary changes. Joint planning and oversight are essential, as is a willingness to broaden the role of community-based partners. Into a systems perspective, a systemic perspective looks at aggregate data that determines trajectories to incarcerations and how interventions can be applied to reduce failures that lead to incarceration. A continuum of lesser restrictive interventions can be implemented to intercept the need for incarceration. For example, in SB 678 and AB 109, they're both intended to reduce prison commitments, while systemic interventions looks at the entire justice system operation. Parole, returning to jail, and the increases of non-serious offenders at the local level will impact local jails, many of which are already overcrowded. In this instance, systemic interventions should look at the entire probation and jail populations to determine ways to alleviate the pressures that realignment presents. Next, a commitment to thoughtful planning and data-driven practices. Through systemic interventions are based on data-driven processes that rely on objective data rather than anecdote to make system improvement planning and policy development and continuous improvements in practice. The three components that are essential. One is baseline data, or the development of baseline aggregate and disaggregate data that provide a portrait of the system outcomes and processes. A second one is continuous management of data-driven processes, and the last one is completion of those results. The process also involves an examination of key decision points. Systemic interventions are premised on the understanding that at each stage of the justice process, namely pretrial, sentencing, and community supervision, discretionary decisions are made that greatly influence system outcomes. Some systemic practices are conducive to offender success, while others may actually compound failures that may not even be linked to criminogenic risk. By aggregating data at each decision and process point, problems to be addressed, systems to be championed are illuminated. Next point, building capacity through a continuum of options to safely reduce reliance on incarceration. A continuum of lesser restrictive options that are developed and tailored for the pretrial sentencing, community supervision stages of the criminal process. Evidence-based efforts recognize that incarceration, while necessary in some cases, is costly and provide a contagion factor for deviancy and future recidivism, and may escalate future recidivism and imprisonment. A continuum of lesser restrictive options provides interventions in which evidence-based programs can operate at the local level. These options are developed, implemented, and monitored to ensure that public safety is maintained and net widening does not occur. In terms of innovation and replication, PBP promotes the replication of strategies that have been proven to achieve desired outcomes and encourages the creation of research-based improvements. Systemic interventions promote both the creation of strategies that improve systemic outcomes and implementation of locally designed innovations that would appear promising after careful data analysis. While ongoing monitoring, effective interventions are identified that can become new evidence-based practices. Ineffective interventions are improved or aborted depending on the outcomes. From policy to practice, the degree of data-driven opportunity for systemic interventions is only part of the battle. The implementation of systemic interventions requires attention to change management and a strategic approach to implementation efforts. Leadership, collaboration, communication, feedback, and the overall alignment of business practices are critical elements in facilitating systems change. Last point here, commitment to research-driven practices. Data-driven techniques must be supported by research. A commitment to research helps justice administrators create learning organizations that are wisely use resources for maximum public benefit. In terms of systemic intervention practices, you see on the screen are the 4 practices that we're suggesting here. Conducting a data analysis, system practices, and that involves reviewing system decision-making points, as we mentioned earlier, analyzing relevant practices and analyzing relevant process and outcome data, determine baseline measures, identifying resources and support to develop the capacity for doing so, selecting an opportunity for a systemic intervention, and that involves identifying the bottlenecks and inefficiencies and unwanted results, forming a question and hypotheses to resolve the identified issue, which may require digging deeper into the problem, developing procedural and programmatic solutions to have the maximum impact within the resources available, and the identification of resources and support to develop the capacity for doing so, and then implementing the systemic intervention. So we want to strategically plan for the intervention, align communications, data feedback, and change management strategies, and continually monitor and evaluate. Identification of the resources to support the capacity for doing so, and then implementing accordingly and as needed. Before we begin our panelist discussion, let's poll our audience again. Which of the following categories best describes your current experience with local criminal justice systems data analysis? So a little bit of time to make a choice here. While you're completing the questions, we want to remind at any time you can submit questions through the question box. Looking at the results, looks like about 31% have tried, but there are gaps in the system, and about 4% had it but are struggling to analyze it. Okay, this information, I want to now turn over to the folks from Travis County to help you, our audience, gain additional insight into the work that's been done around the country in terms of systemic interventions at the local level. At this point, I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Nagy and Dr. Anderson.
We're going to talk about system change. We touched on the issue of collaboration, research, and problem solving with data. I am the director of Travis County and also pretrial services and also a drug diversion court, which is a separate agency. Justin is our senior researcher and has been with us since we began to implement evidence-based practices in the probation department in 2005. So we're going to share some of our experiences, and hopefully our experiences will help you in thinking through some of the challenges that you face right now. thought it might be just helpful to give you a snapshot of our Travis County. This is Austin, Texas, criminal justice system. We have a population in Travis County of about 1 million people. Any day and time, we have about 2,400 inmates in our local jail. We have a pretty vibrant pretrial services office. We interview about 30,000 persons per year that are eligible for personal bond. And of those, we grant personal bond about 60% of the time. However, if you look at our jail at any point in time, about 68% of the detainees there are pretrial detainees. Monthly adult probation population is around 12,000, about equally split between felons and misdemeanors. We have 8 district courts and 6 court at law judges, all of which are elected. At the felony side, there's about 9,000 felony cases per year that go through our district courts, and about 30,000 misdemeanors go through our county court at law courts. We have a county attorney and a district attorney and a number of municipal courts and magistrates that we work with around the bond issues. But oversight for most of our criminal justice system is through Commissioner's Court. That's our county judge and our elected commissioners from our various precincts. However, probation is funded and has oversight by the state. We have Community Justice Council, similar to your CCP. It is statutorily required to approve the probation department's plan. And we also have a local criminal justice planning agency, which is a county department which works directly under Commissioner's Court to guide them on criminal justice issues. So it might be helpful for you to kind of get an idea of who we are and how our structure and our system might compare to yours, and might also be helpful as we talk about various things as we move along. Okay, California, as Mac said, there's a number of things that you're faced with right now. We just took a look at the paper, and we found this in the LA Times, and some people are looking at this as a real pressure on the system and possibly an unfounded mandate. But at the same time, others are looking at this as a driving force or an opportunity to really look at more meaningful systemic change. We're going to focus on that latter as we go through. However, it is important to recognize that it is putting strain on your system. And I think from your perspective, this is important to recognize for one main reason, and that is when you're in crisis or you're needing to do something quickly, people often abandon a system perspective and start focusing on the more immediate ways in which they can deal with the problem. And in this case, your problem is you're going to have a number of persons released from the state jail, the state-operated prison system, and that's going to put some strain on your system at some level locally. And for many folks, it's more than they expected. We also got this from, I believe, the LA Times. Los Angeles, for example, it's almost twice as many folks will actually be released than what had been projected. And that's also true for Orange and Riverside County. And I know there's folks from all over California participating in this workshop, and I would suspect that's also true for you. So, as Max mentioned, you have Senate Bill 678, which provides monetary incentives for reducing revocations and encourages you to utilize evidence-based practices. From the Texas perspective, I would like to say we're just very jealous of Senate Bill 678. I don't know if that's your perspective. It does provide some kind of incentive for moving forward with evidence-based practices. We don't have that in Texas. And hopefully it will actually come about so that when you do release revocations, you will get some funding. I understand that bill also established the Community Corrections Partnership, which includes individuals throughout your local criminal justice system, but the chief is the chair of that Community Corrections partnership. You also have AB 109, which requires post-release or community supervision of certain felony offenders. So just from Texas, learning about this, and not a whole lot of depth, but getting familiar with it, it seems that you have major challenges. One is short-term, which means managing this new population of offenders. You're going to be getting them soon. You're on a timeline. But you also have a long-term objective, and that's to create a criminal justice system that can manage these individuals, but also help you to achieve system change and stability in the future. And that is where where data comes in, because I have found it's almost impossible to achieve system change without using data, simply because let's know what the unintended consequences are of various solutions to problems, or even implementing a program. We need to know about that. We have to have a pulse on it, and the best way that we can do that is through data. I think I have another poll now. Let's see, this poll looks at collaboration among system stakeholders, and as we just mentioned, it's critical in analyzing criminal justice system practices and identifying opportunities for intervention and improvement. So before we get into this further, let's go ahead with this poll, and we're going to poll you on where your community corrections partnership is in terms of team building. So you have the questions there. We'll give you a little bit of time to answer those questions, and then we'll get the results. And I think in a moment we should have our results. There they are. Well, it looks like the majority of you are in the process of working together and making progress towards your established goals. And then a number of you have not answered that question. But those of you that did answer, it looks like you're in the process. I would say that's pretty typical. I know in California we've had community justice councils for almost 20 years, and there's a large variety of structures, and also we're in the process of creating true systemic change. Okay, so to move forward, this is what we're going to do in our presentation today, Karsten and I. We're really going to look at how to examine the effective utilization of data research to enhance that collaboration with your other state and local agencies to effect systemic change. We're going to talk about how to use data to form policies and to enhance the effectiveness of your agency operations within that system. And there's something that is very important to us. We know that there's a lot of diversity in terms of data systems, the availability of data, the support that you have to utilize data. We don't think a person needs to be at a perfect place to utilize data. You may need to start small and then grow as you go along. I think what we are going to be encouraging you today is to leverage the data that you do have so that you can move forward and grow in your utilization of data over time. Okay, this is a long chart. I hope it isn't too difficult to read, but what I'm trying to show in this chart is the entire criminal justice system, which is pretty common for most local criminal justice systems. You start with law enforcement. There are different individuals involved, like the police and the bond courts, and then there are certain points where people may move the system. Those are by the pathways out, mostly towards the top, and there are decision points along the way in terms of, for example, with the law enforcement, there's release without prosecution after arrest. So that's a decision point. If you move across, there's decision points and paths for exit throughout the criminal justice system. What I found is that most people focus on their own criminal justice points and focus very little on the others. What a systemic approach would do is have you use a model such as this to really get a sense of what's happening across the system from arrest through parole supervision in the community. So you're going to be seeing this chart as you go along. Your CCPs, if you can look at, and hopefully you can read it, the white reading down at the bottom, you can see that your CCPs involve folks from each of these major categories within the criminal justice continuum. Right now, I'm involved in a project with my Community Justice Council. I just volunteered to do this. One of the things that we have struggled with is getting grant funds. And for the of you who have applied for grant funds, you know who else within your local criminal justice system is going to apply for one. You don't really have a sense of what the whole system needs and where you can most leverage your resources. And if it's a federal grant, you often don't have the data to apply for a federal grant anyway because you don't usually know in advance by more than a month, maybe 6 weeks or maybe 2 months. So what we're doing in Travis County is we're looking at the continuum and we're collecting data, and that's what the question marks identify. We're collecting data at different points to describe our criminal justice population and describe their needs, such as their mental health needs, so that we can then, as a Community Justice Council, prioritize, in this case, our mental health needs, and then apply for grants. And the system has already decided what the priorities are, so we don't need to worry about are we stepping on anybody's toes or that sort of thing. While this looks pretty simple, it's actually very complex. We're dealing with a lot of different data systems, but just to get an idea of how you might use this continuum for that purpose.
Okay, so this is Karsten, and I thought, now that we've been talking about it, I would tell you about a slightly simpler approach to the same sort of systemic intervention. I'm going to tell you about some work that we do with criminal justice planning, and that was the agency that was mentioned in Dr. Nagy's Travis County slide. They're an agency responsible for looking at a lot of the criminal justice data throughout the county. And criminal justice planning a few years ago decided that they wanted to start doing some research looking at jail crowding and looking at potential issues that could be drivers in jail overcrowding, and so they invited a lot of different agencies to participate and work with them. I'm just going to give you a concrete example of some of the work that we've done with them in the next few slides. We provide data to them every month, and we participate in meetings and planning sessions with them. Again, at this picture that Dr. Nagy showed you, they together criminal justice planning every month put together a jail population reconciliation report. It's a page report, and it takes data from all of these agencies and all these aspects of the criminal justice system that you see in front of you. They take information from law enforcement. They'll have information about who's booked, their offense type. They'll take information from trial about who's released and on bond, on other kinds of bonds. They'll take information about different kinds of caseloads in the courts, election dockets, and so forth. And they'll also take information from the district attorney's office. And they also take information from Travis County Adult Probation and Parole. And the reason I just wanted to introduce this report to you because it's a way that you might start thinking about ways of working together and looking at systemic drivers of jail overcrowding. In this population reconciliation report, the jails contribute data, pretrial services contributes data, the county attorney contributes data, as well as the district attorney, the district courts, and Travis County Adult Probation. And people provide different amounts of data, and at the start, people were providing less data than they do now. But I'm going to show you how we provide data to them just to sort of be an idea of is monthly data to criminal justice planning. This is a form that we give them every month. I know it's too small. I'm about to blow up the form. But we email this to criminal justice planning every month. And it contains information about the people that we supervise and kind of they're at in their supervision process. As well, we have information, got a little scrub up there, but we have information about who's in jail awaiting treatment and the average number of days that people are waiting for specific types of treatment. And from data that we give that we give criminal justice planning every month, they're able to put together this report. These are pages in the jail population reconciliation report. And I know it's very small, it's hard to see. Just giving you an example of how they use our data. If we blew it up, it would probably be kind of boring if you're not in Travis County, but you can see this is the first page, and these are the people that we're supervising and kind of where they're at and what stage they're in. And this next page is information related to treatment beds and days that they're waiting services in the jails. But this is an example of how counties can work together to get a report about the drivers of jail overcrowding.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about mental health because we did a similar sort of thing around the issue of mental health. And this, Travis County had been working for probably 5 or 6 various committees, some in the community, some through the court, some through probation, some criminal justice planning, all talking about mental health. There's a great deal of concern, and we weren't getting very far. We really were unable to move forward. And what we realized is that there was a whole lot of spinning wheels, too many committees meeting, not enough coordination. So again, we stepped back and took a systemic approach, and we worked with the Council of State Governments in September 2006, and I believe this was funded through the National Institute of Corrections at a mental health learning site. We had a group of individuals, and in this case, it would have been top administrators, the decision makers in our local criminal justice system work together, meeting at least monthly. So we had our state and local mental health agencies, we had Travis County Adult Probation, we had the district attorneys in the county attorney's office, we had criminal courts administration, members of the judiciary, both district courts and county court at law, the mental health public defender's office, we had pretrial services, legal aid, the jail, and a state entity called the Texas Task Force on Indigent Defense. What we decided to do is that we would together begin to look at these various issues. First, we wanted to determine how the various criminal justice and mental health initiatives that were in place at that time related to each other, and we wanted to identify how they overlapped and start narrowing that down by defining the target population that we felt needed priority in Travis County. Then we began to look at our screening procedures because we had mental health screens done within the jail, we had them done within pretrial services, we had them done again in probation. Oftentimes there were different screens or assessments, and there wasn't a lot of communication from one agency to the next. So each agency was doing a great job for mental health at their level. The problem is that these screens and this information didn't pass through the system as the offender passed through the system. And so we began to do that, and we worked on getting the assessment as close as we could to the first point of contact, which ended up being the jail. We also wanted to evaluate the capacity and the effectiveness of the current court and public defender mental health initiative, and so that could inform whether or not we wanted to expand that. And in fact, it turned out quite well, and we have expanded that to the district courts. And we want to measure the impact of current probation and mental health efforts in Travis County. So that together, and a number of things occurred. I already talked about assessment at the jail, so we focused a great deal there. We focused a great deal on passing that information along to pretrial services, drug court, probation, and we talked about the public defender. But we did a lot of things within probation as a result of the mental health learning site that I'd like to talk to you about because I think they're very exciting. We worked with the county to get funding to co-locate probation, the probation mental health officers, and our mental health service agencies, including psychiatrists, nurse, and other folks, benefit specialists, in one area. So we have now a one-stop shop where they are all located together. And Dr. Fred Osher worked with us to develop a team-based approach because it isn't enough to simply be in the same building. You could still work as parallel entities. We actually wanted to work from a team approach. We reframed probation supervision to actively engage the clients in mental health treatment. We focused a great deal on risk, also need assessment at the pre-trial stage because many of these folks are under supervision during the pre-trial phase. They have a bond which requires that they report to a pre-trial mental health officer. We wanted to develop a more treatment-oriented response to violations for the mentally ill, so we created a mental health support court, which is a problem-solving court which works with individuals who are having difficulty while they're under supervision due to their mental health illness, and also simply to just be more supportive to enhance the success of these folks overall. We trained our probation officers more extensively in mental health issues and motivational interviewing, and we've had that now for about 2.5, 3 years, maybe a little bit longer, but Carsten has done analysis. He can give you more specifics. We did get an impressive reduction in recidivism, including declines in revocations and also new arrests. And what's interesting about this is this is all a change in how we did business. So we had mental health officers before, had mental health caseworkers before, but what we did is bring all of these folks together, working with the mental health client in one place, and the result then was due to the systemic change and not due to simply getting more money or more resources for the mentally ill. That actually pretty much stayed the same.
Okay, and I'm just going to just really quickly talk about some other county-level collaborations that we've engaged in with other agencies in the county. So we mentioned criminal justice planning. We've worked on 2 other projects with them. We worked on an employment project where we looked at issues facing people who criminal histories and who are trying to get employment. And we looked at our probationers and what their employment issues might be. We looked at increasing how much of an issue that unemployment was. We looked at increasing stability and dealing with underemployment. Then also we work with them, on the Travis County Justice System Profile. And that's criminal justice planning every year basically releases a sort of a summary of yearly statistics on how the criminal justice system is doing in Travis County. And so we contribute data and talk with them about that data as well. Then we also work with the Community Justice Council, which we've talked about briefly at the start. We've worked with them around homelessness and housing issues and worked on trying to get information about who's vulnerable for being homeless and what kind of housing they need and what kind of housing might work best with them given the issues that they might have. And we provided data to them and sat at the table and talked with them. We looked at what people have sometimes called the frequent flyers in our courts, people that regularly appear in court, people that have 90 appearances in a year, and looking at trying to get those people lined up with some of the services that they need. And we've also collaborated with the Community Justice Council. They put a benchmark dashboard every year, a report where they provide statistics about the public health and public safety of Austin, and we talk with them about some of the measures that they used and help them brainstorm about some of the data that they use for that report. So they're just some of the simple ways, some of the ways that you can begin the conversation with other counties, agencies within your county about using data to problem solve around issues that every county has to deal with.
So we've talked about various initiatives taking a systemic approach. We want to talk about what you can do in your specific agency, of course, working within the context of systemic change. I've had a lot of experience here in Travis County now working across boundaries, and one of the things that I mentioned with regards to mental health, but also other areas, is that we had a habit of getting together, talking about problems, brainstorming, having a discussion, having a plan, and then we begin the next month and we'd start at square one again. And I think it's important to recognize that systemic change has two levels, one across the system, but also within the organization itself. So, for example, here at Travis County, we are responsible for pretrial services and the drug court, which occurs at the drug court level. It's a diversion from prosecution, and probation. When we're working with the system, we have to be able to go back, look at our decision points, pull out data for the systemic change, but we also must be able to do it for our own operations from time to time. So I'm going to focus on that aspect of the presentation. And I begin by talking about pretrial. But let me rephrase this a bit. So we use data at the agency level for system planning and problem solving, but there are some other areas that are just as important. For example, it's very important to use research and data to establish credibility with stakeholders and the community. And Alma Carson's going to talk about risk assessment. It's very important that our stakeholders, such as our judiciary, our district attorney's office, and others, believe and have confidence that assessment does what it is supposed to be doing. So we use research to do that. We use research on almost a daily basis to make operational decisions or to problem solve at the agency level. We use it to establish and to modify policy decisions. And finally, we conduct research to get information. For example, our program's working, so we measure outcomes. And we'll give you some examples of that in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So as I said, we'll start focusing for the moment on pretrial and agency change within that organization. These are the goals of our pretrial services evidence-based initiative that we began about 3 years ago. So we wanted to reduce the number of pretrial detainees in jail. Now, for our statistics, we already have a pretty vibrant pretrial service agency. It's a well-respected agency within Travis County criminal justice system, and it's an agency which people believe by far pays by itself because it so contributes to solving the jail overcrowding problem. But we want to move towards a system where the pretrial decision-making is made with a validated pretrial risk assessment instrument, and then we wanted to take that a step further, that when you are deciding at what level of supervision that pretrial defendant should get, you're making decisions that have to be within the context of their legal rights, but also within the mandate that we manage risk that these individuals might pose to the community. So that's our goals for pretrial services. So this is what we've done in the last few years. We worked with Ed Latessa, starting in August of 2006 and ending in October 31st, 2006. And we interviewed every pretrial detainee and asked them a whole series of questions, and those questions are related to risk and stability in the community. We had a follow-up period from August 06 to 10/31/07, in which we tracked each and every one of these interviewees for 1 year, and we tracked them for flight, did they in fact show up for court, and also the statewide DPS arrest records, the Department of Public Safety. So 2 measures that were required here One is would they show up for court, and the other is the recidivism. Then he worked with us, and he developed a pretrial risk assessment comparing those items that were predictive of both flight and recidivism into an instrument. And he published that instrument in December 2008. We're lucky enough in Travis County, Texas, to have our own assessment, but that assessment is essentially identical to the one that he has released just lately called the ORIS-PAT, the Ohio Risk Assessment Instrument for Pretrial Services. For the last 2 years, we've been running pilots and hashing through our policy and making some decisions about how this risk assessment should be used at the pretrial level. We have a committee which consists of judges, the county attorney, district attorney, our magistrates, and others to help us in making some of these decisions. We used risk assessment for several months and as part of one of the pilots, but we didn't use it for release decisions. We simply compared what the release decision would be to what the officer actually decided. And the idea here was to determine if there was any unintended consequence of using the risk assessment. For example, would it be biased for any particular ethnic group, male, female, or would it have unintended consequences on the perhaps lead to fewer releases? So we want to know that up front, and we also use that data to develop a more informed implementation plan. And then finally, we're using the risk assessment and defining the supervision component. So we're looking at risk related to conditions. This chart shows you how we use our risk assessment information. We actually haven't started this yet. It's scheduled to start January of next year. But the risk assessment category will put somebody either in the low risk, chart is moderate risk, or high risk category. I'll go back to the low risk. We look to see if they follow all of our policy-based rules. For example, one of those rules, do they live within 3 counties? If it's no, we determine if there can be a policy override, and if there can be, they move on through the process. If it's yes, they move directly to step number 3, which does the defendant have issues of dangerousness? And we use for family violence cases the ODERA, and then we also look at violent indicators in their criminal history, the probable cause, or from the complaining witness. We also look to see if there are any exceptional circumstances. If a person has issues of dangerousness, then we look to see if there's a condition that might mitigate that risk, for example, GPS or electronic monitoring or some other option. If no, they get no as their bond recommendation. If yes, we look to see what would be the appropriate conditions. If the person has no issue of dangerousness, then they're simply placed on bond without supervision and no conditions recommended. It's different with the medium, okay? Because they're medium risk, if they have no dangerous issues, we look to see are minimum conditions that would adequately address their moderate level of risk. If the answer is no, then they do not get bond. If the answer is yes, they do. Otherwise, it's the same. And then with high risk, the same sort of system. So this shows you a flow in which we can make our decisions, which are then passed on to the courts as a recommendation. What's interesting, though, is by having this particular system driven by risk and also by the ODERA and clear criteria, we can collect data at each of these decision points in the future to enhance our system. I know that a few of you are looking at, let me back up for a second. I know that a few of you are looking at how this release of new offenders might affect your jails. And and you're needing to sort out whether or not people are too much of a risk community. So you may be looking at a process similar to this. One thing I want to mention, moving on from pretrial services, I think it's important whenever you're looking at any kind of problem solution program or whatever, to take it a bit slow in the beginning. Let me give you a hypothetical example. You have overcrowding, and someone decides, okay, in order to alleviate jail crowding, we're going to have work release at the jail for first-time DUI. Well, let's think of some possible unintended consequences. Now, work release allows people to have short jail sentences, but then work it off and still maintain their job. It sounds like a great idea. But perhaps in your culture, this leads the defense attorneys to dramatically increase their request for jail sentences because it's preferable to their clients than probation. And, for example, they have to pay $60 a month and go through a number of different programs. Then the county attorney agrees in order to move cases, because by moving cases, that supports the jail overcrowding initiative. The courts agree in an effort to support jail overcrowding. The probation population decreases as defendants receive jail sentences instead of probation. The jail population actually increases, and you have a number of folks reporting there for work release. And then subsequent DUI offenses increase due to a lack of treatment. So what I'm trying to do here is give you an example where something that on the surface, if you look at it from a non-systemic level, may seem like a great idea. If you take the time to really look at how it will play out by collecting data and talking to all the stakeholders, and those that really know are often outside the agency itself, then you can avoid those same kind of problems. Mac mentioned the net. I think that's another example where people often jump to let's have a program. For example, in Texas, we have a number of community corrections facilities. But if you look at the data to see who's served in some of those community corrections facilities, those are individuals that would be served within regular probation. So you're simply just increasing the level of supervision and intervention for folks that don't need it.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about probation, and I've included a few slides that I'm probably not going to talk about today, but that you can look at later in your leisure, and you can sort of look at some of the things that we've done. If you have questions, feel free to contact me about those slides. I thought I'd just start by talking about our goals. So basically, in Tri-County Adult Probation, since I've been here, our goal has been to have risk assessment-driven decision-making for all points of contact. So start to finish, from pre-sentence investigation to the early termination, working at risk and making sure all of these decisions are tied to whether somebody's low, medium, or maximum risk. And by doing that, that allows us to do things like realign our resources according to the risk needs of our population. And then I'm going to tell you about how we have low-risk caseloads, and we've been able to create these low-risk caseloads of a large amount of people that don't reoffend and that are successful in probation because we use our risk score and we tie everything back to our risk score. Probably not going to talk about this today, but we've also, to get a little further down the road, you can think about ways of measuring your implementation of evidence-based practices. We've done 2 studies that we've sort of presented together where we've looked at how we've implemented evidence-based practices. We looked at if officers are doing everything related to evidence-based practices that we'd like them to do. I'm going to just jump right into it and move into I'm going to go from everybody's familiar with risk assessment and probably validating the risk assessments. I'm sure that I'm going to say one point about risk assessment and then move forward. Know that you have that you have N3s coming, your felons with offenses that are nonviolent, non-sexual, and non-serious. That's their offense. And you also have the post-release community supervision populations. You have these new groups of prisoners coming to your counties. So one thing that we use our risk score for that you might want to as well is we look at annually what kinds of people are coming into our probation department and how our population is changing over time. The city of Austin used to be a small college town. Now it's becoming a big metropolis. Our population has increased, I think, 15 or 20% in the last 20 years. So the population of people that we're getting coming on probation are a riskier population than in the past. It's no longer just Willie Nelson. We're getting riskier people. The new people that you might have coming to your counties, you'll want to track how that's going to change the people that you're supervising, if they're riskier or less risky. Move into just talking about our caseloads, and basically this is something you might want to think about if you have if you're using a risk assessment and you have lots of low-risk people. Decided a couple of years ago to put together low-risk caseloads, and we were going to put together people on these caseloads that were low risk, that we thought would not recidivate, and that we could put more people on those caseloads. And we did a pilot program where we actually created six officers had low-risk caseloads, and we followed them for 19 months to see what would happen, and we wanted to see if these officers would have a lot of revocations or if they'd have a small amount of revocations. And you on the screen, these six officers have between 225 and 261 probationers each on their caseloads. I'm showing you the terminations. That's the 1,556, and within 19-month period, only 17 people were revoked. So that was 1%. So we had a sense that this was a good idea. We'd used research, our own data, and you don't need that much research to do this. But more importantly, because we've done this analysis and the credibility, we were able to get buy-in because we were able to show these statistics to the judges, to the officers, to other agencies within our county, and show that having a low-risk caseload is a good idea. And not only does it save money, but it keeps the county safe. And I'm going to...
Mac, I know it's 1:30 now. Do we have maybe 10 more minutes to finish up our presentation? What would you say?
I think that I understand we've got a few questions waiting, so if we can wind it down a little bit to allow some time for some questions, maybe we can try and wrap up within the next 5 to 7 minutes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we'll quickly go through this because this is something that you will probably be looking at as you move along in your implementation of EBP. But one of the things that I wanted to at least highlight here a bit is that once you're implementing EBP, it's very important to go back and determine if in fact it's happening. And that's important for your staff, but it's also very important in the interpretation of any information that you have about a program. So what's referring here is what you often will hear about as fidelity, and essentially it's the presence of your EBP elements, such as your adherence to the risk principle, the need principle, responsivity, dosage, treatment, and the other principles that are listed there as well.
Well, I'm going to step in. Most studies, so this is sort of complicated because if studies that are out there, most published evaluations only look at outcomes. They look at when people start and then whether they're successful or failure, whether they succeed or fail on community supervision. In our own study, we wanted to look at supervision quality. We wanted to see if evidence-based practices is happening. And then later on, we wanted to look at if quality supervision was related to more positive outcomes. And we had up to the point, we'd had outcome evaluations from an external evaluator, Dr. Tony Fabello, who said that we had strong outcomes, which I'll show you in just a second. And we had our own data, which I'm going to show you, that suggested we had strong outcomes. So here are only revocations from FY 2004, fiscal year 2004, or beginning September 2003 through fiscal year 2010. And for this fiscal year as well, these numbers have continued to decline. So we had these big declines happen from 2006 in our total revocations and then as well in our technical revocations. This is from Tony Bell's study, and he found that we had the steepest decline in technical revocations of any county department, big county department in Texas, Travis County, compared to San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, and Fort Worth, that we had the steepest decline in technical revocations. And then Tony did a study, and he looked at, Fabello did a study, and he looked at before we had evidence-based practices, in the middle of when we were implementing evidence-based practices, and after we had implemented evidence-based practices. And he followed in each category, he followed a group of probationers for a year just to see if they were rearrested. And followed low risk, medium risk, and high risk probationers. And he found in all categories that we had a decline in arrests when we moved all the way over to evidence-based practices. And this would be relevant as you have more and more people come to counties. If you're going to do evidence-based practices and not over-program your low-risk people, but aim your resources at your medium and highs, you'll probably see these huge drops in your low-risk people getting rearrested, as well as declines in your medium-risk and high-risk people.
Okay, what this shows is that then as we implemented the evidence-based practices, there was a change in recidivism and revocations, and we showed changes in other measures as well, such as absconding. But couldn't really say, was this because of EBP? The fidelity aspect of it is to say, let's take one step further. We need to know if these results are due to other factors, perhaps just chance, or if they're actually due to successfully implementing EBP. And this particular graph here, I think, is a very useful one for directors. Oftentimes people come to you and tell you there's great outcomes, but maybe that's due to just chance. You get outcomes due to other factors, but the EBP was actually poorly implemented, okay? Then on the other hand, you might have poor outcomes for a good program because, there was a slip in the fidelity of the implementation of the program as you went along. What you want is in the blue program above, where you have good outcomes and good fidelity to the program which you designed. And so Karsten went ahead and measured that fidelity to our BBP program. And I'm just going to flip it here because this shows you where we measured EBP. We began our initiative in 2005 with planning. In 2007, we implemented our EBP risk-based diagnostic report for the courts. We changed our supervision processes in June. We implemented progressive sanctions and incentives in August. We did training throughout this period. In January, we changed our personnel evaluation. And so it is at this point, right after January, that we did our first EBP fidelity study.
Okay, for fidelity study, we actually did two studies where we followed two groups of probationers. We followed all felons placed on probation in January 2008, for people that were indirect for less than 3 months. And what we did is, people that were placed on probation January 2008, we followed them for 6 months, and we looked at every piece of paperwork that was filled out about them, everything on our case management system. We looked at everything that officers documented that they had done. We also did the same thing with a group of probate felons and felony reduced and misdemeanors in January 2009. And so we looked at each group, and we looked to see what our officers were doing and how they were interacting. I'm just going to show you this slide quickly. We had 134 felons in the first group, we had 102 in the second, and then a sample of 17 felony reduced and 46 misdemeanors. And our cuts in these studies, I just want to emphasize that we added managers to the second one, 3 managers, which was extremely effective. They saw what we were doing, able to learn from their experience. And then we looked at fidelity from the diagnostic report at court, went to supervision, we looked at sanctions and incentives, and we looked at outcomes. And a longer report that we can show you as well, we created a case review for this, and we filled out all of this information, this case file. This is too small for you to see. We can email it to you if you'd like. And we looked at at things like, sorry about that, folks, for our felons, was there a supervision agreement completed within the first 60 days? They're supposed to have a supervision agreement. We found for our second group that there was an 85% for completing the supervision agreement, and we looked at several factors under here that you'll be able to look at later, and we can answer questions about if you have questions.
This might, if I'm sorry, off there, Dr. Anderson, but this might be a good time to, in lieu of our time, I know you have some good implementation suggestions towards the end of the presentation, and then still allowing some time for some questions. I want to encourage maybe that you kind of head to the point a little bit so that we can still answer some of the questions that have come forward.
Okay.
Sounds terrific.
Okay. Do you mind for just a second, Max? I just showed these slides. This one shows savings to the state.
Sure.
As a reduction in vacation. This one shows savings about $380,000 to the local state jail as a result of the changes that we made in probation. And this again is not new resources. This is how we did business. And I think this is what you're referring to, some specific examples.
Okay. So I'm going to talk on this one slide. We have examples in other slides, but you can look at that in your own time. But just suggestions for starting a data analysis of your local criminal justice practices. I would just say first, examine what others are doing in California, outside California. Call on the phone, go and visit them if you can, and talk to them and reinvent the wheel. Next one, when you're working with your people within your county, I would identify your databases up front, talk about how you like to share data face-to-face and have a conversation about that. As well, predefine data that you need for a specific project. When you're working on a project, just define in advance what you're going to be talking about when you talk about something like recidivism. Define what you mean by recidivism as you work together in advance. Have a code book and definitions of your data, and also create a data request sheet to enhance communication and track work. This is just a sheet. Somebody requests data, have them fill this sheet out, and be able to sort of track how you're sharing data and working with data. And I think that can do it for me.
I think that's it. Is that good, Matt?
So, know that if I may, first I just want to thank both of you tremendously on behalf of all of my colleagues in California, because what you've been able to accomplish and do there in Travis County really can serve as a forerunner for a lot of the things that we're trying to do here in California with both AB 109 and AB 678. I want to bring Christy Danford back online because I know that she was tracking some of the questions that we'd had from some of the participants. So, Christy, are you there?
I am here. Actually, some of the questions have been specifically around data and define data and sort of some of those code books. Carson, a question actually came out specifically about how did you get all of the participants to agree on the type of data in the reconciliation reports and various departments to share the data in the first place?
Well, I think, this is sort of almost like the golden, I think all of us coming together and it was just the data people, and I know data people generally don't have best communication skills. I took my glasses off for the picture I submitted so that I'd look less data person, but we started talking together and having casual conversations, and we took the stress away, and I think, we all talked at the table, and we just sort of let our guard down, and nobody would sort of say, this person doesn't have that data, or this person's data is funny, or they don't understand their data. I think if you're all in it together, and you're able to just have a meeting where you can freely communicate, then you can really start to break down those defenses and then start to work towards a goal. And to just maybe to have somebody in charge that can help moderate discussions or just deal with people that have more strident opinions. But, it is just data. So that's what I would advise, is just to try to, if there is stress or arguing about it or not wanting to share data, try to identify what that is. But one thing, we all did not want to burn anybody. So if anybody comes into the group saying, I'm going to take this agency down or I'm going to show this, then it's going to hamper that data effort. So I hope I answered the question.
And could you share another question. I'd like to put one, if I may, directly to Dr. Nagy. And Dr. Nagy, if you would, and this actually kind of you addressed on the last couple of slides, talk a little bit about the benefits to the director of a data-driven organization, because I want to make sure that you don't get cut off on that point.
No, I came in 2005, and we didn't have a researcher. We kind of flew by the seat of our pants in terms of getting programming done. We had somebody that pulled a little data here and there for reports. But I strongly believe if you're going to be an evidence-based organization, you need to make your decisions on the basis of facts and data and research rather than opinions, and oftentimes it's simply just fear of change. And data has just been essential for me. I think this group is the hardest working group in our department, and because they are often called upon to help clarify problems that we're addressing, or before we implement a new project, to help us in the implementation process. So really critical in problem solving, really critical in implementation. But one of the areas that people don't realize, really critical in getting resources. We have a researcher, which of course is Karsten. We have a person that has a deal of operational knowledge working with us data, and then we have a programmer. Not everybody can have all three of those folks, and particularly those in rural areas, it simply just may not be feasible. But I would just like to say, however you can get it done, working with folks at a university or whatever, it is well worth your time to do it, because it simplifies the work of a director, specifically when you've made a commitment to make decisions that don't come back on you or create big problems for somebody else in the system.
Thank you so much for those points in particular, especially in acknowledging about different ability for departments to have somebody devoted to research, because I believe that my department in California is one of maybe only three where I have the benefit of having a director of research, and some of my colleagues have tried to steal her, and I'm trying to hang on to her fiercely.
Well, they can't cross in Texas, I can tell you that. We're not going to let them in. We need cars.
So, Christy, we have a couple other questions.
We had another question that came in about the homelessness issues that you all were talking about earlier. Reference those are significant as well in California. I'm just sort of wondering if you could comment a little on the impact of the efforts you guys have done in Travis County.
I can talk about it a little bit if you, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so basically, involved in this project at the county level because we have a lot of homeless people, and as you know, there's different ways that you can count them, there's different ways that you can code them, there are different ways that you can respond to them. And basically, what came together is just to think about ways that we could provide them with housing, and that we could have them be successfully housed. So we talked about, so this group took it from us on our people that were homeless, and we tried to look at people that might be in shelters and what their people that move from house to house to house. And I just provided my end information about probationers that were homeless. Sectors have housing issues. That's going to be a harder thing to work out with housing. But on their end, it's easier for me to answer this question because they're the ones hashing out that policy and how that's going to work best. Different counties have different ideas about things like what they're doing in Seattle, where they're putting people that have drug or alcohol problems in their own place and paying for that. I'm not sure what we're going to do in the county, but we just provided them with that data, and we'll interact with them. But the C-level discussions thing, I'm not involved in that aspect. And
right now, the Urban Institute is working with us on a Justice Reinvestment project, and it is focusing on housing. So a lot of the data, and this is a systemic perspective. Actually, they have a phone conference, I think, going on right now.
Okay. Go ahead, Karsten. Was that you?
I hope that answers your question.
I did. I actually had a question I wanted to ask earlier when we were were talking about your pretrial approach and the looking into the jail population. Do you have data on the average length of stay for the felons in Travis County Jail?
We do, but I can't remember that off the top of my head. But we do have that. I get that to you, and anybody else that would like to see it, I can get it to you. You know, what we found out is there's two groups that are creating issues. Those who have long sentences, and maybe it's a felon being reduced down to a misdemeanor and serving a year, and then the frequent flyers, which interfaces with the whole homeless issue. Those people that come into the jail, you know, up to 20 times a year. Those are the two populations that are problematic for Travis County.
It's an issue in California because with realignment, the sheriffs are now receiving felons with longer sentences, longer as a result of staying locally. And I know that it's a topic that a lot of the other chiefs are addressing with their sheriffs in terms of those who have not been involved in trial programs, wanting to take some steps to move forward in that direction. So your information along those lines was particularly timely. I also want to say, if I haven't already, we particularly appreciate your attentiveness to the California issues in your presentation and how you were able to relate a lot of the things that you've accomplished in Travis County with some of the things we're facing here in California.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Christy, do we have any other questions from
Yes. What about the jail population report that was discussed? If you could just talk a little bit briefly to the kind of information that's in there, and also perhaps mention a couple of the reports that you might be willing to share that we could post online for folks to access and use as a resource.
Because I have a jail population reconciliation report here, just in case somebody asked that. Wow, there's a lot of fields. I mean, you know, it's 10 pages worth of fields. It's from booking, the level of the offense, the level of the felony, the level of the misdemeanor, the type of offense. I'm just going to take 30 more seconds because this could be a very boring data download. The total of people that are not detained and release bonds, the total of people that are detained. As well, you have individuals that are screened for pretrial or eligible for bond. You have a laundry list of data that's available on the jail reconciliation report. So that's the long of it and the long of it. So I hope that answers your question. We also have a case file review form that to get at your question about date, and we also have a presentation from our fidelity study that might be helpful. The case file review form is just how you look at your own data and the way that we coded our files and case management system data. So you might want to think about looking at that. And I'll just say one last thing. When you share data with other people in your county and you start to work together and you establish trust, one thing that's nice is you don't totally own the problem. You're not as stressed out about how you're going to deal with it alone because you're working with other people who have other ideas. So that is a real upshot of working with somebody, working with other counties or other county agencies. And that's that answer.
Krista, we also have a website in which we have posted a number of what we call incubator reports that document our whole process of implementing EBP for the adult probation. It has the 10-step guide and a variety of different presentations that we've done. So that would be very, very helpful to folks.
Doctor, if you could send that link to me, I'd be happy to send that out to the participants.
Okay, so it'll be an email after this is over.
Be wonderful.
And also
for being willing to share that.
Also link directly to it from the website, so folks have that if they go up to download this at a later date or time.
Oh, okay. Great.
Then just one. So it looks like we have one more question. And this for folks that you know have not started sort of a system data analysis to the extent that you all have been able to experience with, do you have some effective strategies or tips for them? Sort of where do you go from day one?
you have, I'm just going to say something and pass it over to Karsten. I think you have a real opportunity with your community corrections partnership to do this. Our been around, as I said, for 20 years. They have met historically monthly, but it's only more recently that we have started really doing the meaningful work of getting data, tackling issues where something is really implemented. And if you can create a agreement in your community corrections partnership that this is a meaningful contribution to your CJ system, that it's important that people be there, I think that's the first step. I mean, getting data, I think, is you may need technical assistance with and that sort of thing. But a lot of people have data and they still can't do it because they can't get people together to do it.
Yeah, I agree too, because sometimes almost having too much data can be a peril, because sometimes when I'm with the people that I work with, we say even if you had all the data, you probably wouldn't know what to do with it because it would just overwhelm you. So starting from day one, I would just look at what you have available and can do with it, and just make a plan for what you're going to do with that data. And slowly, as you are doing things with that data or thinking about collecting that data, just think about what's the next little step forward. Don't be intimidated. Don't feel like you have to suddenly start to collect a bunch of things. Just start planning and start talking with other people, counties, people within county, and other states. We do that all the time. We pretty much figure out what other people are doing, and then we try to copy them. So it makes it easier. So.
And I'll just say one last thing to all the directors out there. You know, it's a lot easier to ask for information than for somebody to get that data and give you a good answer to your question. So as a director, I think it's very important first for you to have a close relationship with your data team so they understand you and you understand them, and a relationship where they can tell you, do you know what you're asking for and what this means, and how are you going to use this? Because how you're going to use it really drives what kind of data is needed. And the contribution of the director is to simply really be supportive of your data team, because oftentimes people collect a bunch of data, but it's never used because the director hasn't really defined how that information should be used or the potential for it to be used.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nagy, Dr. Anderson. I think we're going to start to bring the webinar to a close. I mentioned earlier, I think both of you have done a really nice job in sharing the systemic and data-driven approach that you've used in Travis County and how it's produced results for you. And it does, again, lay out for us in California, gives a framework of how we can approach some of the challenges that we are facing right now with both AB 109 and SB 678. I'd like to bring Christy from Crime and Justice Institute back online now.
Jenkins, and thank you, Dr. Nagy and Dr. Anderson, today for taking the time to share your insights and experience with us today. We hope the information that was provided to the audience was useful, and we invite you to our next webinar, which is coming up in Friday, December 16th. We'll focus on selecting opportunities for systemic interventions, and then as well the next one in January, on January 20th, to talk about implementation. Really appreciate your time in joining us today, and please, again, feel free to come to our website where we're going to post this information, and we'll also give the link to Dr. Nagy's website and some other information. There, probably within the next week, hopefully not too far, probably before Thanksgiving, but possibly afterwards. Just want to remind you that following the completion of this broadcast, a pop-up evaluation form will be provided. We'd like to thank you in advance for any thoughts or feedback you can give us so that we can continue to improve our webinars. Thank you so much, and you all have a great afternoon.
And Christy, if we could just let the folks know that we are also doing webinars for executives as well, so please keep an eye out, particularly chiefs. Those emails will be coming to you regarding webinars specifically geared towards executives.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.